News reports, a lot of them suggest he could be the next national security advisor. So the following question is more relevant than ever. What does Ambassador Bolton think is the greatest threat to America today? Ambassador Bolton joins us tonight. Great to see you, Ambassador.
Glad to be here.
So it feels like we're moving kind of in slow motion toward a conflict with Iran and Russia in Syria. Do you think we are?
Well, I think that's one possibility. I think the Iranians have clearly gamed what they plan to do after the defeat of the ISIS territorial caliphate.
Yes.
I think they were thinking of it when our strategists were not thinking of it, and we're now suffering the consequences with Iran literally on Israel's border, flying drones into Israeli airspace. I don't think that's the really most dangerous aspect of the Middle East, though. I still think it's Iran's support for terrorism and its continued effort to get deliverable nuclear weapons.
Right. So obviously Iran was greatly empowered by the fall of Saddam. I think in retrospect we can concede that. There haven't been any Iran-sponsored terror attacks in this country that I'm aware of in the last 25 years. There have, of course, been many, many, many sponsored by Saudi Arabians and the Gulf states and the Sunni Arab world. So why should we see Iran as our primary threat?
Because Iran, for many decades, has been the world's central banker of international terrorism, funding Shia, Sunni terrorists on an equal opportunity basis, providing arms to them as they do to Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So it's their support for terrorism generally that should concern us, not necessarily specific attacks in the United States.
But, I mean, in order to, commit American troops and the billions it takes to prosecute any kind of conflict, wouldn't you want to go after the people who are attacking us here first?
Yeah. Well, nobody's talking about committing massive amounts of troops. What we have to worry about, I think, most importantly, is the threat of North Korea's nuclear weapons program, which is more advanced than Iran's. But it all ties together in the Middle East. You may have seen reports recently of a UN inspector's study of North Korea selling chemical weapons, precursor chemicals, and equipment to manufacture chemical weapons to Syria,
right,
likely financed by Iran. So there's a palpable threat of weapons of mass destruction, something President Trump acted against earlier in his term, that the North Koreans have brought into the Middle East with Iran's participation.
I believe that they're all bad places. Though in 2015 you wrote a piece for the New York Times saying we ought to bomb Iran in order to stop their weapons program.
That's not quite what I said. That's what the New York Times headlines said.
Right. Well, that's how I read it anyway. I mean,
and as you know, they write the headlines and the op-ed writer.
Right. But I don't think that's the only time you call for conflict, armed conflict with Iran. But if we had done that then, where do you think we'd be now?
Well, I think Israel could have done it 15 years before, and we'd be in a much better place, as Israel itself and the United States are in a better place today for Israel having bombed Saddam Hussein's nuclear reactor in 1981, and for Israel having bombed the reactor that North Korea was building in Syria in September of 2007.
So you've called for regime change in Iraq, Libya, Iran, and Syria. In the first two countries, we've had regime change, and obviously it's been, I'd say, a disaster. I think we agree.
No, I don't agree with that. And let me.
You don't think it's been a disaster?
No, because to argue that, you have to argue. Let's just take Iraq to begin with. You have to argue that everything that followed from the fall of Saddam Hussein followed inevitably, solely, and unalterably from the decision to overthrow him. And that's simply not true.
I would never argue that. I'm merely arguing the macro picture, since you just said that Iran is the single greatest threat to us and to that region. I think you'll concede that Saddam was the greatest counterbalance to Iran, and they were empowered by his fall. So I think it's fair to say if you think Iran is the real threat that way, it's kind of hard to defend that decision, right?
No, because I think your analysis is simple-minded, frankly.
Okay.
The Iranian threat, which stems from the revolution of 1979, was underway quite apart from what Saddam Hussein was doing. The Iranians have been trying to get nuclear weapons for 25 years.
So you don't think the fall of Saddam made Iran stronger?
I think it made the fall of Saddam, no, did not make Iran stronger. What made Iran stronger ultimately was the withdrawal of American forces in 2011.
So if you, I'm not saying you're the only person who thinks that. You're the only person I have met who thinks that. What would you say if you could sum up the one lesson from what has happened in Iraq? What would it be?
Well, I think the overthrow of Saddam Hussein that military action was a resounding success. I think the mistakes that were made subsequently, setting up the Coalition Provisional Authority and others that followed from it, are lessons about what to do after a regime is overthrown. But I'd also point out, because of President Bush's surge policy, when his administration ended, stability had returned to Iraq. It was not a place you'd go for vacation.
Right.
But he turned it over to Barack Obama, and it fell apart subsequently. And the point I think you need to understand is that life is complicated in the Middle East. And when you say, well, the overthrow of Saddam Hussein was a mistake, is simplistic.
I would argue that I'm the one who understands how complicated it is, but just my view.
It's your long experience in foreign policy.
Better record than yours, I would say. But thank you, Ambassador. Good to see you.
Sure.